The winter air in southern Germany was supposed to feel like victory. Instead, it felt like something rotten had been buried under it. A U.S. reconnaissance unit moved slowly through the edge of a liberated farm sector, boots sinking into frozen mud. No gunfire. No resistance. Just silence. Too much silence. Then one soldier stopped dead. "Sir, you need to see this." What they found behind the broken fence line wasn't a battlefield. It was something worse. A makeshift kennel. And inside it, well-fed German guard dogs. Healthy. Brushed. Protected from the cold with more care than the men who used to guard them. Nearby, just beyond the barn, American prisoners' remains were found in shallow graves, poorly marked, hurriedly covered, forgotten by the very system meant to protect them. The contrast wasn't subtle. It was an insult carved into reality. One soldier whispered, almost angry at the air itself, "They fed the dogs better than our men." That sentence spread faster than orders. At battalion level, officers arrived within the hour. Silence turned into paperwork. Paperwork turned into tension. And tension turned into fury. A young captain demanded answers from a captured German supply handler. Who authorized this? The man didn't flinch. They were prisoners. Dogs were assets. That word, assets, hit harder than any bullet. The captain froze. Not because he lacked authority, but because he realized something worse than disobedience had occurred here. Systematic cruelty dressed as military routine. By dusk, the report was already moving upward. Division command. Then higher. And somewhere in the chain of radio calls, one name began to change the temperature of every room it entered. George S. Patton. Because when Patton heard reports like this, it didn't become paperwork. It became judgment. Inside a command post miles away, a field radio crackled with the first broken fragments of the report. The officer listening didn't speak for a long time. Then quietly, "Confirm this again." A pause. Then the final confirmation came, and the air in the tent seemed to tighten. Because if it was true, someone had turned war into something else entirely. The officer slowly reached for the communication line that led upward, toward the man known for turning hesitation into history. But before the call connected, the radio cracked again. Another message incoming. Higher priority. Urgent. And the words that followed changed everything. "General Patton is requesting immediate briefing." The officer swallowed hard. Outside, the wind over the German fields didn't feel like victory anymore. It felt like something was about to break. The briefing tent was colder than the winter outside. Not from weather, but from anticipation. Maps lay pinned across wooden tables. Cigarette smoke drifted in slow spirals, as if even the air was unsure how to behave. Officers stood rigid, waiting for confirmation that no one wanted to hear again. Then the radio operator spoke. "General Patton is en route to command channel." A pause. And then, "Repeat the incident summary." The captain stepped forward, voice controlled but tight around the edges. "Sir, multiple American POWs discovered in shallow graves near a liberated farm sector. Evidence suggests systematic neglect and execution conditions. German guards maintained kennel for military dogs, with better provisions than prisoner holding conditions. No one moved after he finished, because saying it out loud made it real in a way no map ever could. At the command level, anger doesn't explode immediately. It condenses. Into silence first, then pressure, then decisions that can't be undone. A colonel leaned over the table. "Are we certain this isn't battlefield exaggeration?" The captain turned sharply. "We dug them out ourselves." That ended the debate. Far from the field site, another conversation was already forming, faster, sharper, more dangerous than any frontline exchange. Because the name being carried upward was no longer just about victims. It was about accountability. And then the line opened. The radio operator straightened. "General Patton on channel." A pause stretched so long it felt intentional. Then his voice cut through. Controlled. Flat. Unmistakably present. "Report." Every officer in the tent felt it, that psychological shift when authority enters a room without physically being there. The captain repeated the summary again. No embellishment. No emotion. Just facts. When it ended, there was silence on the line. Then Patton spoke. 2 words. "Confirm location." The tone wasn't anger. It was calculation. A map was slid across the table. Coordinates read aloud. There was another pause. Then Patton responded again, slower this time. So we have prisoners executed, while animals were maintained. No question in it. Just structure. Just reality being organized into something actionable. A staff officer hesitated before speaking. General, we are awaiting full verification before. Patton cut him off instantly. You don't wait to verify death when you are standing over the bodies. Silence snapped back like a whip. Outside the tent, boots moved faster now. Orders were beginning to form. Radios were multiplying. And somewhere in that growing machine of command and consequence, the situation stopped being an incident and started becoming something irreversible. Because Patton had not yet arrived, but already everything was moving as if he had. The convoy came without ceremony. No lights flashing for attention. No dramatic arrival. Just engines grinding through frozen dirt roads, cutting through a landscape that had already seen too much war to be impressed by anything else. But the moment the lead vehicle stopped, everything tightened. George S. Patton stepped out first. No hesitation. No scanning the horizon like a man unsure of his ground. He already owned it. Officers straightened instinctively as he moved through them. Not because they were ordered to, but because something in his presence made delay feel like failure. Inside the command tent, the atmosphere changed the instant he entered. Not louder. Heavier. A folded report was placed on the table in front of him. He didn't sit. He read standing. One page. Then another. No reaction. That silence was worse than shouting. A colonel began to speak carefully, almost cautiously. General, preliminary findings suggest. Patton didn't look up. You're still calling them preliminary. The colonel stopped. Patton turned a page slowly, as if time itself was waiting for him to decide how fast it should move. Then, he spoke. 20 American prisoners. A pause. Fed less than dogs. He looked up now. Not angry. Focused. Like a man solving a problem that offended him by existing. A junior officer shifted uncomfortably. Sir, we are preparing formal charges through the chain of. Patton cut him again. There is no chain for this. The room went still. Even the radio operator stopped breathing for a second. Patton placed the report down. Not gently. Deliberately. Then he stepped closer to the map table. What unit controlled that sector? A finger pointed. A division designation. Patton repeated it once, as if testing whether it deserved to exist. Then quietly, so while my men were dying for Europe, someone decided standards applied only to animals. No one responded. Because there was nothing safe to say to that. Outside the tent, wind dragged across the German fields. Somewhere in the distance, artillery echoed faintly, not from battle, but from aftershock operations still cleaning up the war. Inside, Patton's voice dropped lower. Find every name involved. A pause. No exceptions. Then he looked up at the room, and for the first time since his arrival, there was something colder than anger in his expression. Decision. Because now it wasn't about what had happened. It was about what would happen next. And everyone in that tent understood. The next step would define more than justice. It would define consequence. Night didn't soften the camp. It sharpened it. Floodlights carved harsh circles into the snow-covered ground outside the forward command post. Shadows of soldiers stretched long and restless, like they were waiting for something to admit itself. One by one, the captured German personnel were brought in. Not generals. Not heroes. Supply staff. Field guards. Unit handlers. The people who always survive long enough to explain what others did. Inside the interrogation tent, the air smelled like wet wool and burnt fuel. And at the center of it all, George S. Patton stood near the map table, watching without interrupting. The first prisoner was pushed forward, a young German corporal. He avoided eye contact immediately. An American intelligence officer began. State your unit and responsibility at the farm sector near coordinates. Patton raised a hand. The officer stopped. Patton stepped closer. Not rushed. Not aggressive. Controlled. Ask him what he fed the prisoners. Silence hit the tent. The interpreter hesitated before translating. The German corporal answered quickly. Rations were minimal. They were prisoners. Patton tilted his head slightly. And the dogs? A pause. The corporal shifted. They were guard animals. Required for security, Patton's expression didn't change. Were they fed more than the prisoners? The corporal looked down. That was answer enough. A chair scraped slightly as an officer shifted uncomfortably behind the table. Patton didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. You understood starvation as policy. The interpreter struggled slightly to keep up. The corporal shook his head. It was war. We followed procedure. Patton stepped in closer now. Just enough to dominate space, not invade it. War does not require you to forget you are human. A long silence followed. The second prisoner was brought in. Older, less confident, eyes already defeated. Before anyone could ask anything, he spoke quickly. I did not authorize executions. Patton turned slightly toward him. Then you observed them. A pause. The man swallowed. Yes. Patton nodded once, as if confirming something already concluded. Behind him, a junior officer whispered, Sir, we have enough for tribunal proceedings. Patton cut him off again, sharper this time. This is not about tribunals yet. The room tightened. Because that meant something else was coming first. Something more immediate. Patton looked at the map again. Then at the reports. Then finally at the officers. And when he spoke, it wasn't anger anymore. It was clarity. You don't get to call this chaos. A pause. You organized it. Outside, the wind pressed harder against the canvas walls. Inside, every man in that tent understood the same thing. This was no longer about finding truth. It was about deciding what truth would cost. And Patton was already calculating the price. The interrogation tent had gone quiet in a way that felt unnatural. Not peaceful, strained. Like the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for permission to move again. Outside, guards shifted in the snow, stamping their boots to stay awake. Inside, the captured men sat under harsh light, their answers already recorded, but not yet judged. And at the center of that judgment stood George S. Patton. He hadn't spoken for several minutes. That silence was not absence. It was processing. A staff officer finally broke it carefully. General, legal command is requesting we proceed with formal detention protocols and transfer to higher tribunal authority. Patton didn't look at him immediately. When he did, it was slow. Measuring. You are suggesting we outsource understanding of what happened here? The officer hesitated. Sir, chain of command requires. Patton cut through it cleanly. Chain of command does not erase judgment. The room stiffened again. Because now the tension wasn't between soldiers and prisoners. It was between systems. Order versus responsibility. A German prisoner shifted slightly, then spoke through the interpreter, almost desperate. It was war. Everyone suffered. Patton turned instantly. That response landed differently. Not as defiance, as justification. He stepped closer. Do not confuse suffering with license. A pause. His voice lowered. Not softer, just more precise. You did not suffer your way into killing men who could not defend themselves. The prisoner fell silent. A junior officer near the table leaned in. Sir, higher command is also concerned about retaliation incidents if this escalates publicly. That word, retaliation, changed something in the room. Patton turned toward him. Slowly. You are concerned about reaction. A pause. I am concerned about precedent. Silence again. Heavy. Final. Outside, a radio crackled urgently. Messages stacking. Requests for clarification. Legal review. Political oversight. Inside, none of it mattered yet. Because Patton had not made the decision that everyone was quietly fearing. He walked to the map table again. Looked down at coordinates. The farm sector. The graves. The kennel. Then he spoke, almost to himself. They maintain standards for animals. A pause. But not for men. He straightened. And in that moment, the room understood something shifting. Subtle. Irreversible. Not rage. Direction. Because Patton was no longer reacting to the crime. He was defining how it would be answered. A senior officer finally asked, carefully, General, what are your orders? Patton didn't respond immediately. Then, gather every responsible name. A pause. No delays, no shielding. He turned slightly. And, prepare the site for inspection. Another pause. And documentation, the weight of it landed fully now. This wasn't just investigation. It was exposure. And exposure in war was never neutral. Outside, the wind hit the tent harder. Inside, everyone understood the same truth. The next chapter wouldn't be about what was found. It would be about what the world would be forced to see. The convoy reached the farm at first light. No sunrise warmth, just a pale, exhausted sky that looked like it hadn't decided whether to witness this or look away. Snow crunched under boots as soldiers formed a perimeter around the site. The barn stood half-collapsed, its wood darkened by time, neglect, and something worse that no one wanted to name too quickly. A shallow wind moved through broken fencing. Empty dog chains still hung from a post, too orderly to be accidental, too maintained to be forgotten, and just beyond it, the ground. Disturbed soil marked by uneven digging, not burial with respect, not even burial with haste. Something in between, concealment. A young lieutenant swallowed hard. Over here, this is where they started. Shovels went in. At first, only frozen earth, then fabric, then bone. No one spoke loudly anymore, because sound felt disrespectful here. When the remains were fully exposed, the unit fell into a silence so dense it felt like command itself had stopped breathing. A medic stepped back slightly. 20, at least. The number wasn't said like data. It was said like weight. Then came the kennel area. Still intact. Still structured. The contrast hit harder than the graves themselves. Clean posts. Controlled spacing. Feed buckets positioned with care. A system of comfort built beside a system of death. And standing at the edge of it all was George S. Patton. He didn't move immediately. He observed everything like a map being completed. Not shocked. Not surprised. Absorbing. A staff officer approached carefully. General photographic documentation is underway. Patton nodded once, then stepped forward toward the graves. He stopped just short of the edge. A long silence followed. Then he spoke, not loudly, but in a way that carried across the entire site. This is not disorder. A pause. This is not breakdown. He turned slightly toward the officers behind him. This is instruction followed without resistance. The wind moved again through the fence line. Somewhere behind him, a camera clicked. Patton continued, voice steady. When men are treated as less than animals, the result is not cruelty. A pause. It is permission. No one interrupted. Because there was nothing to correct in it. Only to absorb. A junior officer, shaken, finally asked, "Sir, what do we report to headquarters?" Patton looked at the graves again. Then the kennel. Then the soldiers standing frozen in place. And his answer came clean, absolute. You report exactly what exists. A pause. No dilution. Another pause. No protection from truth. The silence that followed wasn't just grief. It was realization. Because now there was evidence. And evidence meant responsibility could no longer hide behind uncertainty. As the documentation teams continued working, Patton turned away from the site. Slowly. Deliberately. And as he walked back toward the convoy, one thing became clear to everyone watching. The discovery was no longer the story. The response would be. And whatever came next would not stay contained in Germany. The report arrived like all dangerous truths do. Quietly. Through channels that understood exactly what they were carrying. No celebration followed it. No victory tone. Just the cold transfer of facts from field to higher command. Facts that no one could reinterpret without sounding like they were excusing them. And at the center of those facts was everything the farm site revealed. The graves. The kennel. The names being compiled. And the chain of responsibility that refused to stay contained. Inside the forward command environment, tension had shifted into something sharper. Anticipation of consequence. Because now it was no longer about what happened in one field in Germany. It was about what kind of war this had been allowed to become. George S. Patton stood alone near the map table. No officers speaking. No radio chatter interrupting the silence. Just him. Reading the final compiled report. Page after page. Evidence structured into certainty. A senior officer finally spoke from behind him, cautiously. "General, Washington will want a controlled summary before public dissemination." Patton didn't look up immediately. When he did, his voice was level. "There will be no controlled version of this." The officer hesitated. "Sir, political sensitivity." Patton cut him off, but not sharply this time. "Precisely. If sensitivity overrides truth, then truth becomes negotiable." Silence followed again. Outside, trucks moved. Units rotated. War was still technically ongoing somewhere beyond this moment, but inside this space, something else had already ended. A staff aide approached with another document. Tribunal recommendations are being prepared for surviving personnel involved. Patton took it, looked at it briefly, then placed it down. No. One word. No explanation. That alone was enough to freeze the room. He continued. This did not happen because one man decided it. A pause. It happened because too many men agreed to stop asking questions. No one responded. Because it wasn't a statement meant to be argued. It was a diagnosis. Later that evening, Patton stepped outside the command tent. The wind was calmer now, the battlefield quieter. Somewhere far beyond, artillery still echoed in distant cleanup operations. But here, it felt like the war had shifted into its final form. Aftermath. A young officer approached carefully. Sir, what do we tell the men? Patton didn't answer immediately. He looked toward the horizon, then spoke. You tell them the truth. A pause. No decoration. Another pause. No comfort added. The officer nodded slowly, unsure whether that was permission or responsibility. Patton turned slightly before walking back toward the light of the command tent. And just before he entered, he added one final line, not as a speech, but as a conclusion to everything that had unfolded. Wars are not judged by how they are fought. A pause, but by what they allow to exist when no one is looking. He stepped inside. The tent flap closed behind him. And outside the wind moved across the German fields, over graves, over empty ground, over silence that would not stay silent for long. Because stories like this don't end where decisions are made. They end where they are remembered.